Hi, everybody. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today, we have an article for you with a few questions to make sure that you understand what you are reading. The title of today's lesson in our in-depth news, we have a news item and we really explore it. We give you a lot of information about it. This is the COP26 Conference Outlines Challenges for Global Leaders.
好，我们的中文标题是第26届联合国气候大会世界领袖面对的挑战。
All right, some of those words you may not be familiar with now, but by the end of the article you should be, which I will now read, and then we'll go back and go over each and every sentence for you. The 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26, was held from October 31st to November 13th, 2021, in Glasgow, Scotland. 200 nations came together for 2 weeks to discuss climate change and to submit their plans to keep global warming well below 2 degrees centigrade by 2030. The end goal is to cut global warming to net zero by 2050. Also, many nations pledged to reduce the use of coal, which is the cause of 40% of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, the wording was changed from phase out to phase down after last-minute interventions by a couple of coal-dependent countries. The U.S. and China are two of the biggest polluters on the planet. China's share of global emissions is 27%, while the U.S. share is 11%. These two countries came to an agreement by pledging to cooperate more over the next decade to reduce methane emissions and promote clean energy. Other agreements include financial institutions investing U.S. $130 trillion to fund renewable energy projects and shift from fossil fuels in areas such as electricity generation, heavy industry, and transportation. Over 100 countries, which account for 85% of global forests, also promised to stop deforestation by 2030. Environmental organizations say that all these promises are great, but they've heard them before. Countries have to make their pledges real, which will be the true test for the parties of the negotiations.
So, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, or the UNCCC, also known as COP26, which is slightly better, was held from October 31st to November 13th, 2021 in Glasgow, Scotland. So that sentence is a very classic news introduction sentence. It says what it is and when it happened and where it happened.
OK, 好，所以呢，第26届联合国气候变迁大会 ，also known as 也称为COP26。好，那这个 COP 因为它也有警察的意思所以这个蛮好玩的。大家看到这个名字想到警察然后呢，这个会议呢 was held 就是被举行，从这个10月31日到11月13日在哪里举行呢？在苏格兰的这个Glasgow 这个地方举行。
200 nations came together for 2 weeks to discuss climate change and to submit their plans to keep global warming well below 2 degrees centigrade by 2030. 200 nations is almost all the nations. It depends on what you call a nation. There are something like 220 to 240, if you include a lot of little ones that some people might not. They're hardly bigger than cities. Anyway, to get 200 nations to come together is no small feat. They were together for 2 weeks in Glasgow, Scotland. And of course, the topic was climate change. And they were supposed to submit their plans. Here, submit means to offer, to show other people something that you have. And the plans were for keeping global warming well below 2 degrees C. We can read the C as C, or centigrade.
Or Celsius.
Or Celsius, both of which start with the letter C, within the next 10 years.
好，所以呢，有200个国家 came together， 就是共聚一堂 for 2 weeks， 有2个礼拜的时间共聚一堂，目的是要 to discuss， 要讨论 climate change， 讨论气候变迁这个议题，同时要 submit， 要提交要这个递送他们的计划。计划的目的是要干嘛呢？ Their plans to keep global warming， 然后把这个世界全球暖化这个程度呢，把它这个限制在well below， 就远远要低于 well below 这个摄氏2度 C。 那什么时候之前要做完这件事情呢？在2030年之前要做完这件事情。
Okay, so the third sentence here in the paragraph says, the end goal, the thing we're working towards, is to cut global warming to net zero by 2050. So there will be no more warming after that. The warming that already happened will exist, but we won't continue to warm. That's what cutting global warming to net zero means. Now, I also want to point out that these 3 sentences could constitute our entire paragraph, our entire story, because it's got the first sentence, which is the who, when, where. The second one is the what. So 200 nations did what? They came together and they talked about what to do. And then the third sentence is what they're trying to do. That's what their goal is. And so with these 3 sentences, we have very completely and efficiently described what's going on.
好，所以这一段的前3句呢，它的目的非常清楚。第一句，它告诉你 who, when, where， 然后第2句告诉你 what， 第3句告诉你 what they're trying to do。 所以这3句就给你很这个完整的资讯。好，那第3句讲什么呢？他说 the end goal， 就是它的最终目标。这个 end 在这里是指最终，它可以当形容词来用。所以 the end goal 最终目标是要 cut， 要这个削减 global warming， 把这个全球暖化削减到怎么样 net zero。 net zero 就是净零，所谓的净零就是该减的你都把它减掉之后，要得到0这个数字。我们常常讲 net profit 就是你的净利，这个 profit， 就你把你的成本都扣掉之后你净赚的那个叫做 net profit。 好，所以呢他们认为他们这个目标，最终的目标是要在2050年之前呢把全球暖化把它降低到净0。好，所以2030年之前要把它降到远低于2度 C， 然后到2050年希望能够得到净0。那这样的一件事情呢，就像刚刚 Bruce 老师讲的， Bruce 老师用了一个片语叫 is no small feat， 就这不是件简单的事情。is no small feat， 那个 feat 的 F-E-A-T， 不是 F-E-E-T 是 F-E-A-T， 不是这个脚很大不是is no small feat， something is no small feat， 就这可不是件简单的事情F-E-A-T。
Also, many nations pledged to reduce the use of coal, which is the cause of 40% of greenhouse gases. Some countries, India and China, burn a lot of coal because they have a lot of coal. Therefore, it's convenient and cheap. Unfortunately, no matter where you are or who you are, burning of coal produces a great amount of pollution, which is bad for our health, and it also warms the atmosphere.
OK， 好，所以我们看到他说这个很多国家pledge 就是宣誓要怎样他们 guarantee by promise 我一定会做到所以他们宣誓要 reduce 要减低要降低 the use of coal 降低煤的使用which 就是指这个煤呢它是 the cause of 它是什么东西的成因呢是 40% 的温室气体的成因it's the cause of 40% of greenhouse gases 要注意温室气体中文感觉就好像是 气体，你看不出来单数还是复数，可是英文呢通常是用复数的，因为温室气体不是一种而已，好几种，温室效应的气体，然后 greenhouse gases 是复数。
Unfortunately, the wording in their resolution was changed from phase out, meaning get rid of, to phase down, meaning reduce. After last-minute interventions or, arguments by a couple of coal-dependent countries. So a couple of countries who very much depend on coal were like, yeah, we can't do that, so we're not going to do that, so we have to change the wording of this agreement. And so, nothing's going to change from this COP26.
So there'll be a COP27.
Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen.
好，所以呢，很不幸的 ，unfortunately, the wording 就是他们这个决议或者他们这个目标的措辞wording was changed 被改变了。从什么呀？本来他是讲 phase out 是怎么样？是 to get rid of 或者是 to bring to an end， 通常是 one stage at a time。好，从这个 phase out 把它变成了 phase down 那差别在哪里？前面那个是 to bring to an end， 那phase down 的话，就是它只是 bring down， 那慢慢减低 one stage at the time。所以本来是说我们一步一步要把它这个 get rid of it 那现在呢只是 well we'll bring it down 一步一步来那当然这个强度就差很多了。那这件事情为什么会发生呢？因为这是在 last minute interventions last minute 就是在截止前的最后一刻，本来大家都讲好了这要发表之前突然有
intervention 是介入干预的意思。那么是谁在干预呢？是 a couple of 两个 coal independence countries 依赖煤炭的国家，他们出面说
不行这样子的话我们做不到或怎么样，总之他们出面干预，所以最后大家只好把 phase out 把它变成了 phase down。
All right, next paragraph. The U.S. and China are two of the biggest polluters on the planet. In fact, they are the two biggest as you can see in the next sentence, they are the two largest, with India number 3.
好，所以呢，美国跟中国是两个最大的 polluters 污染源on the planet 那刚刚 Bruce 老师讲，这个印度是第3。
China's share of global emissions is 27%, nearly 1/3 of the entire world, while the U.S. share is 11%, which is 1/10 of it. And yep, just going with that.
好，所以呢，这个中国的 share 他们所占有的比例这个对在这个 global emissions 在全球的这个排放量的占有比率是 27%。那美国呢，它的占有的比例是 11%， 那个 share 就是占有的比例。
These two countries, US and China, came to an agreement. They agreed by pledging to cooperate more. They will work harder to solve this problem together over the next decade, over the next 10 years until about 2030, 2031 or 2, to reduce methane emissions. We often talk about carbon dioxide, CO2. CH4 is methane. And the bad news about methane is when you produce it, it increases the heat in the atmosphere much more than carbon dioxide. The good news is that it is destroyed naturally in the atmosphere much faster than carbon dioxide. But when you compare the two, neither one is good for the atmosphere. So we should promote clean energy. And there are natural forces we are trying to use, of course, sunlight and wind, but this is something that nations will have to work on technologically to solve this problem.
好，所以呢，这个地方讲到这两个国家呢 came to an agreement， 他们达成了协议to come to an agreement。 好，那达成协议是干嘛呢？他们怎么样达成协议呢？ By pledging 他们都宣誓他们都保证要 cooperate more， 要更多的合作over the next decade， 在未来的10年，这两个国家说我们会彼此更加的合作，来减低，来降低 reduce 这个 methane 就是这个甲烷的 emissions 的排放，然后呢，他们都会 promote clean energy， 他们都会推广干净的能源，clean energy 就是干净的能源。
Other agreements made at this conference include financial institutions, and these guys pledged to invest $130 trillion to fund renewable energy projects, to change from fossil fuels in areas such as electricity generation, heavy industry, and transportation.
好，那其他的一些协议包括什么呢？ Financial 就是这个财务方面的、金融方面的那 institutions 就是机构，所以 financial institutions 就是金融机构他们同意要 investing， 他们要投资这个美金130兆这个 trillion 就是中文的兆所以这个在中文跟英文的这个数目的表示方法上面呢，就是在 trillion 这个地方中英文都一样所以他们要投资130兆的美金来 fund 就是提供资金来这个为什么提供资金呢？为这个 renewable energy 就是可再生的能源这一方面的 projects 这些计划为他们提供资金，让大家赶快去研究怎么样去开发可以再生的能源或者如何的能够 shift from 所谓 shift from 就是 change from transfer from 就是这个离开就是转换从这里转换掉，就不要再用这个 fossil fuels， 怎么样不要再用这个化石燃料在哪一些领域上面不要再用化石燃料呢例如怎么样这个 electricity generation 就是发电方面不要再用化石燃料，然后呢在 heavy industry 重工业尽量不要再用，像煤就是这种化石燃料不要再用煤了或者是呢 transportation 在运输方面都能够这个转移对于 fossil fuels 的这个依赖所以有提供他们这么多钱，赶快大家想办法看怎么样可以减低对于这个 fossil fuels 的依赖。
Now, this amount of money has to have a time frame, which is not mentioned here. This could not mean $130 trillion will be spent this year until the next COP27. The whole world GDP, the gross income of the whole world last year was $94 trillion. So what this probably is, we've been talking about a 10-year period of time to make this change. Now, that would be doable.
It's still 1/10 of the entire world's GDP for the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. So it cannot possibly be in 1 year. More likely, if all these countries really are going to commit themselves, it would be roughly 10% of the world's total GDP every year for a full decade.
好，所以 Bruce 老师他补充像去年的全球 GDP 呢是94兆美金所以你这样算，他这里说要130兆美金做这件事情，那不可能是一年的事情那如果说他是用10年来计算的话，换句话说每一年他所要花在这方面的钱呢，大概还是差不多全球 GDP 每一年的 10% 所以是很大的一笔数字，这个金钱
Okay, let's continue. Over 100 countries, which account for 85% of global forests, also promised to stop deforestation by 2030. This is one I really hope they can do. The Central Africa and Central and Northern South America and parts of Southeast Asia still have vast forests, tropical jungles, and so on, but they are cutting down and burning these forests very, very quickly. Now, if you take away a forest, if you chop it down or burn it down, that's called deforestation. The forest is away. You destroy the forest. And they've given themselves 10 years in order to try to control this problem.
这个 deforestation 就是砍伐森林有时候不一定是砍伐，有时候它是用烧的或怎么样的换句话就是这个消灭森林所以这句话说 over 就是超过more than 超过100个国家。那这如果说超过100国家的话 which account for 就是占有后面通常加一个百分之比，所以这100国家呢差不多大概就占有这个 全球的森林 global forests 的 85% 啊，所以这100个国家他们这个国境之内有总共加起来差不多全球森林的 85%。那这些国家呢都已经承诺他们要停止砍伐森林啊，在2030年之前他们都承诺说好，我们就停止砍伐森林。那这个是很重要的，因为森林对于生态啊是非常非常重要的，但是全世界很多的森林目前都是遭到这个大量的砍伐，所以如果大家有 85% 的国家有超过100个国家差不多 85% 的森林说好，我们2030年之前就不再砍伐森林了，这个当然对世界的这个环境会有很大的帮助。
So environmental organizations say that all these promises are great. It sounds great. That is an enormous amount of money to be saying that you're committing to spending. And if they really spend this money, we might have a chance to get to no more rise in heat. But they've heard them before. They've said these things before. And I'm just going to continue on to the next sentence. Countries have to make their pledges real. They have to do the thing they said they were going to do. And that will be the true test for the parties of the negotiations. That will show us whether they were serious or not.
好，所以呢，这个 environmental organizations 就是环保的组织，他们说呢 all these promises are great 啊，你们这些做的这些承诺都很棒啊 are great， 但是 they've heard them before， 但是这不是第一次听到，换句话说，你们以前就讲过类似的事情，结果都没做到嘛啊，所以 they've heard them before 真正的意思就是哎呀，这个听多了啦啊，类似我们中文讲这我听就这啊，听就这啦啊，然后呢，这下一句他说 countries have to make their pledges real 哈 to make something real 就是你要实现它，你要真的做到，所以每个国家都说好，我们保证怎样，那但是重点是你一定要做到你的保证啊，那这个将会是 the true test 是真正的考验啊 for the parties of the negotiations。 好 parties 在这里不是宴会，它是指参与的各方啊，所以参与这一次这个沟通协调的这个或者是协商的谈判的各方，他们能不能真的做到他们的诺言，这才是真正的考验啊 This will be the true test.
Now we're going to see if you've been paying attention. We have 3 questions for you, the first of which is, which of the following is not an end goal of COP26?
底下哪一个不是 COP26 的最终目标呢？
Of course, the answer is D, making Glasgow a hot tourist destination. Good luck with that.
It's because it's too chilly for that.
好，所以呢，答案是 D 啊，他们并没有一个最终目标说要把这个 Glasgow 变成一个热门观光景点啊，并没有说到这一点啊，因为那地方其实好像天气蛮冷的。
And number 2, why did COP26 use the term phase down instead of phase out on their pledge about coal? And the answer is A, 2 nations asked for the change.
那为什么 COP26 在煤炭承诺当中呢，用逐步减少而不是逐步淘汰呢？啊，答案是 A， 因为有2个国家要求改变，那他们对于这个煤炭高度依赖，所以他们最后介入，所以改变了这个 wording。
And number 3, how do the environmental agencies feel about COP26?
那环保机构对于 COP26 的看法怎么样呢？
Of course, the answer is B. They want to see concrete action enforced.
答案是 B， 他们希望看到具体的行动被实施、被执行。
That's it for today's program. Hope you had a good time with us. Until the next time.
Bye-bye.